Welcome to It's All Mental, a podcast from Everyturn Mental Health. Mental isn't a bad word. There's no health without mental health. We're here to talk about every high and low. No limits, just good conversations.
Hi everyone, I'm Emily Evans. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Everyturn Mental Health, and today I'm with Mona. We're recording ahead of Mental Health Awareness Week, and the subject this year is anxiety. So we're going to have a conversation around that subject. Welcome, Mona. Thank you so much for joining us. If I can just ask you to introduce yourself first of all, that would be lovely.
Sure. Hi, my name is Mona Stilianu. I'm the Principal Clinical Lead for Everyturn Talking Therapies nationally.
Wonderful. So yeah, like we said, this conversation is all around the subject of anxiety. I've had a great conversation with Martha earlier on today, so that's going to be kind of published as part of these recordings as well. Martha talked around her personal experience, but it'd be really great to kind of get your clinical perspective in terms of anxiety. So we'll start with that. So can you just explain to us, Mona, what is anxiety?
So anxiety is a really normal feeling for humans. We all have anxiety at some point in our life. It's sort of our body's way of alerting us that, there might be something that is not going quite right, or, it can be a sort of a gut feeling of a bit worried about something. Everybody gets anxiety. It is part of being a human. So there's nothing unusual about having feelings of anxiety. And just because you have feelings of anxiety doesn't mean that you have an anxiety disorder. So there's that sort of distinguishing between what is normal anxiety and worry and when does it start to go wrong. So yeah, sometimes that sense of anxiety can feel quite physical. So you can have sort of sensations of like palpitations or feeling sweaty or feeling like you can't think properly. So it can become quite a physical reaction. And for some people it's okay and they can manage their feelings of anxiety and they recognize what's causing it, and for other people it might feel quite overwhelming. So I think it's important to recognize when something becomes a problem for you, and that will be different for everybody.
Yeah, definitely. That's really interesting. So in terms of kind of anxiety, that that's very much kind of, yeah, like you said, kind of part of and very normal kind of symptoms to experience. What do you think is the kind of change, the difference, and how do you kind of help, or how do therapists help people distinguish between what is kind of just part and parcel of normal experience, and then what is that when it tips into, like you said, anxiety disorder or anything that can be a bit more complex?
Yeah, so I suppose it's about how often is it present? So if you notice that you're continuously restless or feeling on edge, or you've got that sort of sense of dread of something awful's going to happen, or it's starting to affect your everyday functioning, so you're struggling with concentration, or you're finding yourself being really irritable, or got a short fuse, and things that normally don't bother you are starting to really get to you, and you find yourself becoming more intolerant. Those sorts of things might be an indication that something's starting to go a little bit awry, or that general anxiety and worry about everyday life might be tipping into something that's becoming a condition. I think those are the sort of things to really notice. That I think that sense of restlessness, sense of dread, and really feeling like you're constantly on edge are sort of key clues for me.
Yeah, lovely. And you talked a little bit around the kind of physical symptoms that you can experience. Can you build on that a little bit more and just talk to us about kind of how anxiety can make you feel both physically and emotionally?
Yeah, so it's that sense of, everything's going wrong, finding yourself continuously worrying. So you're struggling with your focus because you're continuously worrying. And I think particularly in the current climate, lots of people are worrying about money. So a lot of that is really normal. But what might happen is that if you have a lot of worries, you've had a lot of stress in your life, things have gone wrong, you've had a relationship breakdown, or something's gone wrong at work, or you are generally worried about money. What can happen is that you find yourself in a place where you're continuously worrying, and that becomes such a natural way of being that you can't function properly anymore. So you might notice that you're not contacting your friends, you're not seeing people anymore, you're struggling with things that you might have found funny before. So there's that, and there's also the physical sensation. Lots of people might find that their sleeping habits might have changed, so they're struggling with sleep. or they're not eating like they used to, they're struggling with food. So you kind of find yourself in just that constant state of dread, really.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. You said about kind of, I guess, the current climate, cost of living crisis, things going on for people. Have you kind of seen, I guess, from clinical practice or in the role that you've done, have you seen things change or get worse or get better, over time, I guess, over a longer stretch of time, or, particularly over kind of recent years with everything that's been going on?
Yeah, I mean, I did a podcast with somebody a few years ago talking about the pandemic and the impact of that kind of general sense of worry in the whole country, and how that was affecting. And certainly in our services, in our talking therapy services, generalized anxiety or anxiety is very, very common, and the most common thing that we are treating. So we're certainly seeing that in our services, more and more people are struggling with worry. And I suppose from our perspective, what we're trying to look at is it general worry? Is it genuine sort of practical worries? And or is it turning into what I call hypothetical worries? So sometimes when you've been worrying about practical things, you then you're continuously worrying, and it becomes a worry about just everything in general. So it becomes a hypothetical worry as well. So worrying about money is really normal. Worrying about your work is normal. Worrying about your health is normal. When it becomes sort of thinking about, well, I'm going to die because I've got a cough, you're going into that hypothetical worry part, which can be problematic, I think, and that's where you probably do need to get some help, either talking therapies or some people get psychotropic medication.
Yeah, really interesting because speaking to Martha earlier on today, we were talking around that in terms of, I guess, kind of what's a normal worry and things, and then actually then being able to recognize those thoughts that aren't as helpful and often aren't correct. And Martha gave some great examples of things around kind of health anxiety, and like you said, kind of having a headache and suddenly starting to think you've got a brain tumor, and that becoming a really really overwhelming, consuming thought. So that's the kind of thing you're talking about in terms of what's kind of normal day-to-day things, which unfortunately is really really real for a lot of people in terms of money worries, but then the difference between things which are just much more kind of unhelpful, untrue thoughts.
Yeah, and there's lots we can do in talking therapy with that. We talk about identifying types of worry and how we manage them. We talk about sort of techniques and strategies to manage worry when you notice that it's becoming a problem. One of the things I think is really helpful to recognize is that if you're someone who's maybe had lots of stresses in your life, and you've had lots of problems, or you've come through some challenges, or perhaps you've experienced trauma in the past, is what might happen is that there is an actual physiological reaction in your body. So you might find yourself living in a constant state of heightened hyperarousal or high alert, and that can stem from your central nervous system just feeling overwhelmed. So there are lots of things that you can do to support yourself with that, in terms of thinking about things like mindfulness techniques or meditation, or just really simple things like going outside in the fresh air, going for a walk, and finding ways of relaxing your body, and then that will allow your central nervous system to start to relax and calm down. And you might find that helps with that sense of dread, that sense of being on edge. So that it might not necessarily always need to be a talking therapy, it might not necessarily have to be medication. Sometimes just very very calming things like meditation or mindfulness can help to start to ease the symptoms.
Yeah, definitely. We'll talk a little bit more around the support. I think that's, and the techniques stuff, that's really, really interesting. I was really interested in what you were saying around the central nervous system there, though, in terms of, I guess, kind of physiologically what's going on. Can you just build on that a little bit more? Because I think, that's not something that I kind of hear much in terms of the, the conversation around these topics, is actually kind of understanding what is going on in the body and, what's going on there. Because I think that's really, really interesting.
Yeah, so if you think about, you've got your nervous system, which kind of runs through your spine, and then you've got these branches that come off it. So I often describe it like a big oak tree. So you've got this oak tree, That's sort of supporting all of your functions. So that's our sort of, every single trigger in terms of noises, sounds, smells, reactions. Everything we do is impacted by your nervous system. So if you live in a heightened state of trauma or stress for a long time, and often this starts in childhood, some of it might be that you've had some challenging experiences as a child. So perhaps you've grown up in a sort of state of slight restlessness. So it's like, if you imagine a big oak tree, so there's the tree in the middle, and then you've got all these branches and it's got leaves. So your kind of peripheral nervous system is constantly slightly fluttering. So you've got these leaves kind of constantly on guard of what's going on. So think of a stressful event like a bit of a gust of wind. So you're continuously slightly swaying or slightly being triggered. But if you've got lots and lots of those events, you're continuously moving to the point where your whole nervous system is continuously on guard or on high alert. So that's that kind of really physical reaction to anxiety or worry or stress. So doing something that's physical, like a meditation, it just allows you to start to calm your nervous system down and slow down the leaves and slow down those gusts of wind. And that can be really difficult to do when you're feeling stressed and you're in that kind of on edge state. So even having a sort of a moment, 1 minute of mindfulness and just watching the world go by can be really helpful to start to settle that down.
I love that analogy, the tree analogy. That's so nice to think about it in that way, and that, kind of visualize it. I think that's a really, really, thank you for that. I think it's really interesting to think about kind of past experiences and how that can, still impact you kind of much later down the line as well. Really, really interesting. Thanks, Mona. And you've touched on some kind of support, so kind of talking therapies, which is obviously one of the services that we run, and some of the kind of techniques within that. Can you, I guess, kind of, for anyone who's listening to this and kind of is resonating with some of the things they're hearing in terms of those symptoms, what would be the kind of some of the first steps that you would just advise someone to start kind of considering and thinking about? Because again, we know there's talking therapies, medications an option, but I guess just as a starting point, where would you start to kind of look at in terms of signposting people towards?
I think for me, if you are noticing that you are living in this sort of sense of dread or restlessness, or you're continuously finding yourself reacting to things in a way that's unusual for you, I think talking therapies is probably the best place to go to first, or speaking to family and friends. If you've got a great support network of friends and family, probably want to check in with them first and have some conversations. But talking therapists is so easy to refer to. You can self-refer. You don't have to even see your GP to come and talk to us. And we've got some great programs in Everyturn. We've got webinars specifically focusing on worry and anxiety. So you can get help really, really quickly with other people going through similar symptoms. And we talk a lot about the techniques in terms of managing your worries and particularly looking at that difference between sort of what are practical real worries and what are hypothetical worries, and how we might manage those two things differently.
Really interesting. And is there any other kind of like resources or kind of recommendations that you'd kind of signpost to as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think social media these days is amazing. There are so many support groups available on Instagram, Facebook, any other social media platforms. And there are some great apps. One of the apps that I often recommend is the Calm app. You can find some really easy, simple techniques for mindfulness, or if you're struggling with sleep, there are techniques on how to manage sleep and sleep hygiene. So those sorts of things is where I would probably start if you feel like you're not quite ready for talking therapies.
Perfect. Well, we'll add some links when we post this as well, with some kind of recommended resources for people to have a look at. Super. Thank you so much, Mona. I'm sure that's going to be a super interesting conversation for people. Really, really useful. So thank you so much for your time.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you.